welcome again. My name is Les Klein. I'm a co-founder and principal of Quadrangle Architects and also the chair of ULI Toronto District Council. It is my distinct pleasure to kick off the 2020 annual Fireside Chat in what is a very special year for ULI Toronto and for the city and for our region. Since this May, which is less than 3 months from now, we will, for the very first time, play host to a major Urban Land Institute conference, the 2020 Spring Meeting. The Spring Meeting will introduce over 4,000 real estate leaders from across North America, Europe, and Asia to Toronto as a global city. As such, the meeting will very much show Toronto in the best possible light. The Spring Meeting is also going to establish the perfect context for this evening's Fireside Chat and our featured speaker, who has played a leading role in making the Spring Meeting a smashing success, as you will soon learn. Events like tonight's are not possible without the support of our sponsors. Thank you to our lead event sponsor, the Carpenter and Allied Workers Union, for their continued support of ULI Toronto programs, and I'd like to ask you to give them a round of applause. In addition, I'd also like to acknowledge our annual Platinum and Gold sponsors who make it possible for ULI Toronto to create quality programming and community initiatives year-round. Before I invite Mike York, President of the Carpenters Union Local 27, to the stage to introduce tonight's interviewer, I also have the pleasure to advise you all of an exciting announcement we made last week about the future leadership of ULI Toronto. My term as chair ends at the end of June, and effective July 1st, Emma West, a principal at Bousfields, will take over as the new chair of ULI Toronto. Emma's leadership resume with ULI locally and globally is extensive, as is her industry involvement here in the Toronto region. Those of you who know her as a values-driven professional and the perfect person to lead the next stage in the realization of ULI's mission to advance the responsible use of land. We also announced our new incoming vice chair and chair of mission advancement, Sydney Rotenberg-Walker, a principal at Urban Strategies. Cindy also brings formidable experience as a leader of some of the most high-profile initiatives of ULI Toronto over the past several years, and extensive involvement in ULI internationally. She is also a recognized real estate industry leader, working both domestically and internationally. I am so proud to hand over the reins of our dynamic district council to these two capable leaders who will harness the momentum of our upcoming spring meeting to take ULI Toronto to new heights. Please join me again in congratulating Emma and Cindy. I would now like to invite Mike York, a member of ULI's advisory board and the president of the Carpenters and Allied Workers Union Local 27, once again this year's Fireside Chat sponsor, to introduce our interviewer for the evening. Mike.
All right. Wow, what a full room. Well done, ULI. Les, thank you very much, and congratulations to Emma and Cindy. Look forward to your leadership. Now, as a ULI Advisory Board member and a sponsor of both tonight's Fireside Chat program and the upcoming Spring Meeting Conference, I'd like to say we have a short video on the Spring 2020 event. shots, great video. And I know that Richard and his team, and those of us in this room, we're all looking forward to hosting the ULI World, so that's going to be great. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce Camille Douglas, who's joining us from New York City as this year's interviewer of our guest, Gary Berman. I just met Camille like 30 seconds ago. Gary, I've known for a little bit longer, so I'm going to take a minute to just say a couple of words. I've had the pleasure of knowing Gary and seeing his career develop over a number of years. We first met when he and Anna Simone were leading the annual Pug Awards that John Bentley Mays of the Globe and Mail once called tough love for Toronto's architecture. And tough love they were, challenging both the development and the design communities to deliver better products to the city, the industry, and the buyers of construction. But Gary didn't just challenge. He was at the heart of some amazing projects that have inspired the city and inspired other builders. And in fact, a couple of recent projects, the Selby and 5 St. Joseph, made the Urban Toronto list of the top 15 projects of the 2010s. You can Google that for more information. Now, this commitment to the built infrastructure is duplicated by a commitment to the social infrastructure of our city. And that's seen through initiatives such as working with Toronto's First Nations community and creating paths for the city's youth to join the construction industry as next-gen workers. And I know that all of us in this room are looking forward to Gary's comments and vision about our industry and our city. Now I'll return to the more formal remarks, introducing Camille. Now, Camille Douglas is a senior executive in the real estate industry with over 30 years' experience in real estate development and finance, executing real estate transactions and financial strategy. Her work has included corporate and project-based acquisitions, dispositions, and financing, including pioneering work on commercial mortgage-backed securities and cross-border equity investment. She's currently a senior managing director, acquisitions and capital markets at Lafrac, a real estate investment and development company. She also serves on the board of trustees of Starwood Property Trust, where she is a member of the audit committee and is also a member of the Real Estate Advisory Committee of New York State Common Retirement Fund. In addition, she has been an adjunct professor in finance and economics at Columbia Business School since 2004. She received her Master's of Urban Design degree from Harvard University Graduate School of Design. Now, before I turn things over to you, Camille, with that extensive resume, to introduce Gary, allow me to extend my appreciation to Gary for his leadership in bringing the spring meeting to Toronto. This is going to be a milestone international event for our city and our urban region, much as Les has said. It's going to be a great celebration of what is truly Toronto's moment. And with that, Camille, the floor is yours. There we are.
Okay, thank you. And thank you all for coming today to this Fireside Chat with Gary Berman, who probably didn't need an introduction to all of you. He is a director, president, and CEO of Tricon Capital Group, of which I'm on the board. I think that was mentioned, yeah. Okay, so I'm only going to say nice things about him. So it's always a bit of a stroll down memory lane for me when I come to Toronto because this is in many ways the same city that I used to come to when I was in charge of financing for Olympia, New York, back in the Stone Ages from 1982 to 1994. We used to come up here on a pretty regular kind of monthly basis to First Canadian Place. So pretty amazing to be sitting here with all of you today. During this period when I used to come up here before, the 4 bank headquarters at King and Bay, where we are now, including First Canadian Place, for us symbolized the strength of the Canadian banks, which from a US perspective, where our banking system hadn't yet consolidated, propelled Canadian companies to grow not only within Canada, but also to expand into the US. and ultimately around the world. So that's a little bit the story of Tricon as well. So during my time at O&Y, I became acutely aware of the similarities and differences between US and Canadian real estate companies and practices, and most importantly, capital markets. And so I was intrigued when I was asked to join the board of Tricon in 2018, and I did so not only because it offered the opportunity to reacquaint myself with the Canadian business community, but also because I understood the company's cross-border challenges. And as I got to know them, and I got to know the other directors and some of the senior management, I developed a high degree of confidence in their business strategy and the focus and discipline of their senior management team on the residential business led by Gary. Very much so led by Gary. So I'm not sure Tricon needs much of an introduction to most of you, but I'm just going to give you a few data points. It was founded in 1988, went public in 2010 on the TSX. Maybe someday it'll be public in the US, we'll see. Focuses on rental housing, first and foremost, with $10.5 billion of assets under management, which is a combination of its own capital as well as third-party capital, which we'll speak a little bit about later. The company's current market cap is over $2 billion, and we own 30,000 rental units in the US and Canada, and I think that includes units under development in Toronto. Two-thirds of the units that we own are single-family and one-third multifamily. And 95% of the company's balance sheet today is in the US, although it is still a Canadian company. So, okay.
That's good. It's pretty good.
Okay, that's like,
Yeah.
how long did that take? So anyway, so it's with great pleasure that I'm here with Gary today. Gary has a very impressive track record. He's been instrumental in every aspect of the company's growth over the last 18 years since he joined the company. He's a relatively young CEO, so although there are many accomplishments which we're going to talk about today, or he's going to talk about, Gary is first and foremost always focused on the future, being as young as he is and seeing and having a vision for where he wants to take the company. So Tricon was founded by Gary's father. That was funny.
You thought you were being kind.
Who is still chairman of the board and chair of the investment committee. But Gary joined the company in 2002 with an impressive resume that includes Harvard Business School, Goldman Sachs, and Blackstone, but chose in 2015 to join Tricon. And so I want to know, Gary, why did you want to work at Tricon? And what has it been like to work with your father day in and day out? Succession is always challenging in family-owned businesses. Why do you think the succession at Tricon has been successful as it has been, which it has been?
Is this being recorded? Yeah, so I got to be careful what I say. Well, I joined Tricon in 2002, and I'd been working in the US for a few years, as you mentioned, and I was working with great companies and great people, but I thought there was a tremendous opportunity to come back to Canada and help my father grow the business. And in that decision, the key thing for me was I thought David would be an incredible mentor.
I love it when he calls his father David.
You know, you know, I grew up. You know, I grew up with David. I had the consummate kitchen table MBA, right? I remember, David in the early years. Remember car phones before anyone had a cell phone. David had one of those car phones, and so whenever we were driving around, I would listen to his conversations, and so I learned a lot in the early years by just being around David. And I just thought, what a wonderful opportunity if I could come back and work with him and learn from him. Now, it didn't go that smoothly, I will say, because the truth is David didn't want me to work for him. So I had to meet his partners. I had to meet some of the developers David was funding, and ultimately, I think David came around when everyone else thought, this makes sense. I ultimately came around to coming back to Canada, but even before then, David said, you know what, you don't really have any real experience. I want you to go and work for a developer. And so I worked for a national property developer here. Everyone in Toronto's heard of them, probably Canderel. But I worked for Canderel for a couple of years on the other side of the table because Tricon was financing Canderel and other developers. And so that's really where I cut my teeth for a couple of years and learned what development's like. And only then was I allowed to come back and work for Tricon. So it took a while. It wasn't, and in the end, it's been the greatest thing that's ever happened. I got far more than I bargained for. I never thought we'd go public. I didn't know how big we would ultimately grow to. I just was really concentrating on what David and I could do together in the short term. And he's just. And the culture has just stayed so true to David's founding principles and hard work, the work ethic, the focus on excellence and continuous improvement and integrity. That was something that was so important for me, to be in an honest environment where we treat people fairly. We're tough, but we treat people fairly. And David, that came through, and that was ingrained in everyone that worked at Tricon in the early years. And then the other thing I would say is that I didn't know Jeff Matus, David's partner. I didn't know Saul Schulman, all three, founding fathers of Tricon, but they're all terrific people. And I think the lesson learned is that, the key is you want to surround yourself with good people. And David is a mensch. He's a kind of the consummate gentleman. He's got this old world quality to him. And I knew that, but then I also was lucky enough to learn and be mentored by Jeff and Saul. And they're both terrific guys. And so it was, I can't tell you how blessed I've been, how privileged I've been to work with Tricon and help the company grow over time. And it hasn't, we've had our challenges. I remember right when I joined the company, after all of that, we lost our key lead investors, right? So Ontario Teachers Plan at that point, which was our lead investor, bought Cadillac Fairview. And they decided at that point that they wouldn't invest in funds anymore. And then Royal Bank Equity Partners basically went out of business. And it was tough because we were on the wall of fame for Ontario teachers. We were probably Royal Bank's top portfolio investment. And literally right when I joined, they said, no more. And that was a near-death experience. And then, we had another one, coming out of the financial crisis. I remember, working here in Toronto at, 1067 Yonge Street, and in the office, it felt like, it was like a sequel to The Perfect Storm. Where the building was literally shaking, it was reverberating, and outside, you'd walk outside, it was Pleasantville, right? But it was a tough environment, and I would say for a period of 6 to 12 months, we didn't know if we could raise another dollar. So we had two, near-death experiences. And through all of that, I can say that David was so calm. He's the guy, the steady hand on the wheel, driving through a rainstorm, doesn't flinch. And that was another kind of great opportunity to go through those very tough environments and know at the end of the day that if you really believe in yourself, you can get through it. And so we had some tough times, but we got through it. I could tell you, I've been with Tricon now for 18 years, I don't think David and I have had one fight in 18 years. And Jeff and David, I think in 31 years, have only had one fight. It just goes to show that if you are philosophically in line with someone, if you have the same view of the world, that's what makes a great partnership.
It's so interesting because succession in real estate companies is a very difficult process usually, and yours has been so successful.
Yeah, and it hasn't been difficult, and I think part of it is because we're all, David, Jeff, and I, we're all very different. But we have a common view of the world. We approach it differently. We approach problems differently, but we're able to come together, and we always do, at the end of the day, what's best for the project, the investment of the company. The egos have to be suspended. And I think to your question on succession, that's really the key. There's two key components. One is preparation. I mean, I'd been prepared and mentored forever. So it made that transition a lot easier. But that was the foresight that I think that David really had. And then it's just, you know, the ego, not hanging on for too long.
Yeah, and I think the company reinvents itself in line with the way the market is moving. And in the Great Recession, the market kind of did a 90-degree, and you kind of reinvented Tricon in the single-family home acquisition business, and now rental in the U.S. So Tricon currently owns 20,000 single-family rental homes in the U.S., primarily in the sunbelt. And we have a core FFO of $85 million a year. We have a joint venture with two leading institutional investors to acquire another 10,000 units. So tell us how Tricon started in this vertical and the role the company has played in transforming this formerly mom and pop industry into a formally managed asset class that it has become today.
Well, we obviously got through the financial crisis. It was tough for a while, but ultimately we were successful and we raised a lot of money. We ended up raising about $1 billion of equity from 2009 to 2012, and we invested that in the sunbelt. Assets out of bankruptcy, we bought discounted notes. This was all for sale housing assets, so land development, finished lots. But we knew in buying all of that we were really just land banking for the future, because the U.S. at that point in time really didn't need any new housing. It was so overbuilt. So then this idea of, you know, could you or should you buy existing homes? You know, if you could buy them below replacement costs, did that make sense? I remember John Ellensweig, who's a senior managing director at Tricon, he came and first told me about this idea in 2010. And I literally said to him, are you fucking crazy? Like, have you ever rented one home, 10 homes, 100 homes? How are we going to do this? This doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. So, you know, we watched and observed. And finally, we got into it in 2012. And we actually got in before Blackstone and Colony. But we got into it the same way that we did development, which was to say we didn't really know how to do this ourselves. Let's partner with best-in-class local operators and let them run the business. And that's what happened. We ended up partnering with 7 different operators in 13 markets, and it was an interesting time because it was this motley crew of people, you know, former land developers or home builders, Wall Street fixed income, you know, people that worked in the Wall Street fixed income or credit desks, technology hobbyists. They'd all kind of come together, this ragtag group of people that were out of work or looking to make money, and created these kind of single-family operators. And shockingly, nothing really went wrong. That was the amazing thing. If I look back to the early days of acquiring, you know, homes on the courthouse steps, I mean, we would literally send representatives with, you know, backpacks full of cash and a gun. I mean, it sounds crazy in Toronto to even talk like that. But that's literally what we did. And you know, our representatives would buy one home at a time, and they would bid in $100 increments. It could take 30 minutes to buy one home on the courthouse steps. It was wild. I mean, it was interesting because there was all these kind of idiosyncrasies in the market where if you and your competitors ran out of cash, which happened all the time, you could literally pick up a home for $60,000 that just traded for $150,000 2 minutes before. So that was the time of you know, the pioneering of single-family rental. But we were taking a lot of risks because a lot of the cases the homes were sight unseen. You weren't actually able to get in the homes. You didn't know if the renovation was going to be $20,000 or $40,000. But we got by, and it evolved. And then we realized after a couple of years, when nothing really went wrong, that we said, why don't we try to do this ourselves? Why don't we try to internalize it and take it over? And we ended up buying out our 7 different operating partners in about 2014. And then in 2015, we did something really smart. We hired someone by the name of Kevin Baldridge. Kevin now runs that business for us. But Kevin was a multifamily professional. He ran Irvine Apartment Communities, one of the largest apartment landlords or operators in the U.S. And we brought him over to help institutionalize and run the business for us. And even that was interesting because Kevin had come from running, you know, the shiniest Class A multifamily portfolio you've ever seen. This is all coastal properties in California. And then he was going to go and manage, workforce housing, where the average home price at that time was about $120,000 to $150,000. In a Canadian context, people can't even understand that. That's like a closet. So, but that's where we were, and it took actually Kevin. We said, Kevin, are you sure you want to do this? And it took him a few days to get back to us. And after he said, yeah, I want to try this. Let's do it.
So when you first bought the single-family houses, did you know you were going to hold them for the long term, or did you think you might end up flipping them? Was that a strategy that sort of morphed, or was it?
Yeah, the truth is we had no idea. I never told that to Ira, who's in the audience, Ira Gluskin, but we really didn't know. In fact, we probably thought it was going to be a trade because we didn't know if we could manage them. We really didn't.
I think that's true of most of the people who got into the business. They figured, well, it's cheap, we can always sell later, and then.
And we thought, look, you're buying these so far below replacement cost. I think that the difference between what we did and others is we really did focus on yield because we were paying, as a public company, we were paying a current dividend yield, whereas Blackstone, for example, wasn't. They were investing through a fund that didn't have a current cost of capital. We did. So we wanted to make sure that we did acquire homes that could produce enough income to pay our dividend.
So recently, Tricon made a big acquisition of multifamily homes in the U.S. as well. So can you describe why that seemed to be a smart strategy, and if you see synergies between the two businesses?
Sure. Well, we bought a $1.3 billion portfolio from Starlight. It was their number 5 core fund. And this is a portfolio of 23 properties, 7,300 units that are located in the exact same markets, never mind markets, the exact same sub-markets as our single-family rental portfolio. And so we thought, in terms of the geographic overlap, it was a really good fit. But at the end of the day, both our single-family rental strategy and this multifamily strategy really appeal to what we call the middle market. It's middle market, it's workforce housing. We define the middle market in the U.S. as households that earn between $60,000 and let's say $100,000. They can pay $1,000 to $1,800 a month in rent. And this multifamily portfolio and our portfolio, we're right in the middle of that.
Yeah,
so rents of just to put it in context for the Toronto audience, rents of let's say $1,200 to $1,400 a month. So very, really appealing to a very similar demographic. And our long-term goal, and I don't mean this literally, is really to control the life cycle of the resident or the household. So when someone graduates, let's say from college or university, they're going to rent an apartment. They could rent an apartment from us, and then maybe they get older, they have kids or form a family, then maybe they need more space and they're going to rent a single family home. And then, life happens, maybe they get divorced, there's a life event, maybe they need to go back into an apartment, they get older, they want to move into a single family rental community. The idea is we want to be able to control that, and we think there's a lot of marketing and operational synergies. And the other thing is that when we talk to major institutions, sovereign wealth funds, private investors, you've probably heard the term beds and sheds, but that's really what they're looking for today. They're looking for residential and industrial. And in residential, they want single family and multifamily. And so if we can offer them both, then that's one-stop shopping. It's almost like a flywheel. So if you were Amazon and you were selling books, would you just stop at selling books, or would you look at complementary products? And we don't want to go too far, but we really view those as complementary products.
So Tricon has joint ventures with institutional partners to acquire more single-family housing. So it was an interesting confluence because the housing became available because of the downturn, and then the idea to hold it for long-term rental kind of coincided with a demographic trend, both of baby boomers needing to liquefy their equity investments and also millennials kind of not really yet able to afford home ownership. So that played into it. And a third factor played into it, I think, was the development of some software technology that permits the management of single-family housing in a way that, and the acquisition. Can you talk about that? How, because it's in some ways, Tricon is a technology company posing as a rental housing company.
Well, yeah, I'd love to say we're a technology company because then our valuation would be 10x. So that'd be great to say. Before, I want to talk about technology, but I think before I do, because we couldn't run our single-family rental business. It is a technology business, absolutely. In fact, RBC put out an initiating coverage on us the other day, and they called us a tech-enabled real estate company, and I think that's the best way to describe it.
That's a good definition.
And we should talk about that. But I think before we get there, I just want to talk about our kind of transformation, because when we went public in 2010, we were only focused on for-sale housing. And now we've made this kind of complete transformation or evolution to be really a rental housing company. So that's a big shift. A lot of people in Toronto think of us as this company that funded condos. It was just, Mike's nodding his head, just for sale housing, but actually today we're a rental housing company. And the reason that we've made this kind of really dramatic shift over time is because that's what the market needs. The market needs affordable housing. I mean, no matter where you are, everyone here knows in Toronto how acute the affordability issue is, but the same issue exists, I think, all over the Western world and also in the sunbelt. And for so many households, and including millennials, housing and ownership is just out of reach now. So we're really trying to fill the gap. We're trying to provide the market with what they want. And in the U.S. in particular, you're right. A lot of millennials saw their parents go through the foreclosure crisis. We didn't go through this in Canada, but they realized, that home prices don't always go up. And they saw the pain that I think, some of their parents went through when they lost their homes and in many cases their lives. Also, there's student debt. Student debt in the U.S. has increased by about $1 trillion in a decade. The delinquency on student debt in the U.S. is 10%. That's a travesty. So a lot of people just can't get into the mortgage market or the housing market if they wanted to. So there's real big changes. Obviously, credit has tightened a lot. Only the best borrowers today get mortgages. So a lot of people are literally just shut out of the market.
And mobility as well. People need to be able to get up and go to the next job.
And I don't know if you saw the Economist expose on housing, but there was one quote in there that really stood out for me. And essentially they said that in the US in 1990, the baby boomer cohort, which at that time were in their early 30s, they owned 1/3 of US real estate by value. Today, a similar sized millennial cohort at similar age owns 4% of US real estate by value. So that's startling. And so a lot of this is being driven by economics and people feeling that they're priced out. But then also, as a result of that, the ideals start to shift, and I think that we're trying to work with that. And when I talk about the ideals, well, it was interesting. I was watching I don't know if any of you have seen the Ralph Lauren documentary on HBO or Crave. I'd recommend it. I've always been a fan of Ralph Lauren and the business he built, but it's really an expose of what the American dream meant to Ralph Lauren, and he built his whole business around it. And he shows you his homes in Manhattan and Bedford and Colorado and Jamaica, and the whole lifestyle is built around ownership. And it's beautifully done, but when you look at it, you're like, wow, this is false. It almost like the American dream is dead, right? When you watch that movie, it just doesn't seem to
Let's say more elusive.
It doesn't make sense today, but as I thought about it, it's not dead. It's not dead. That version is dead.
Yeah.
But just like capitalism, it reinvents itself. So the version of what the American dream today is you can still have all of that, but you're going to rent it.
Yeah.
Right? And so we've gone from...
On Airbnb.
Right. We've gone from accumulating assets, maybe to the extreme, to accumulating experiences.
Yeah.
Maybe to the extreme. But I think what matters today, certainly to millennials, is convenience, flexibility, connectivity we've been talking about in the community. And we're ideally positioned with our rental housing platform to take advantage of those trends.
Yeah.
So we're really seeing, I think, a big shift in what's important to people. All of this is premised on technology, right? So let me talk a little bit about technology.
Because the original skeptics about rental housing said there's no way you can manage it. You sort of alluded to that. They're going to leave with the refrigerator in the U-Haul. It's impossible. Who's going to mow the lawn?
Yeah.
It was very, in the beginning, there was a lot of skepticism about the ability to have a sustainable single-family rental business.
And rightfully so, because if you looked at it through a traditional real estate lens, you would have thought this makes no sense. How could you possibly manage it? And what we didn't, to be fair, what we didn't even know up front, and certainly what the skeptics didn't understand, is it is essentially a technology business. And when you think about what that means, I'm going to get into the specifics, but think about it really high level. What are the different things that are driving that? It's really a confluence of cellular, so that's mobility, access anywhere, broadband, so speed of connectivity, and then cloud computing. Those are really the innovations that have allowed Amazon, Airbnb, Uber to really be the huge companies that they are today. We're using the exact same technologies, right? And that's what those technologies allow us to do is to organize incredibly complex tasks. So if you said to yourself, how can you order something on your desktop, and if you don't like it, you can send it back the next day, and there's millions of people doing this at the same time. How does that work? That's exactly what's happening in single-family rental. We're able to organize millions of transactions. And so we've got to a point now where essentially every aspect of the business is automated. I could talk about that.
So you use technology to buy the homes, to lease the homes, to service, manage, repair, whatever the homes. You use technology across the board in every aspect of the business.
So give the audience some examples. So on acquisitions, we have a proprietary software called Triad, and essentially it uses algorithms to buy a home. So what we do is we screen the MLS, the multiple listing service, every 5 or 10 minutes. In the US, as an example, almost 6 million homes trade a year, and the sunbelt's about 40% of that. So we're literally screening hundreds of thousands of homes in a quarter. We have a 90-point criteria that essentially acts as a funnel. So as soon as a home hits the MLS, it's going to start dropping through the funnel based on the algorithms. What's the configuration of the home? What's the census tract, block group? We're ultimately solving, obviously, for yield, but we're going to look at school scores and crime scores and proximity to transportation. And essentially, we're trying to determine whether that home fits our criteria. We can underwrite the home and put in an offer in 5 minutes. So if any of you have gone through the process of trying to buy a home, you know how daunting it is to buy one home. We're buying 800 homes one at a time per quarter, and that's only because we're capital constrained. If we had more money, we could easily buy double of that. So we basically automated that process. The only time a person, a physical human being, goes into the home is when we have it under contract. So at that point, we'll send a maintenance tech or a super to take a look at the home. And then we've essentially automated the renovation and also the turn process. So this is a key part of our operations. We call that Triforce. And essentially what we're doing is we're standardizing the scope and we're automating the workflows.
And in a way, you're branding the Tricon rental home.
And we're branding it. So we have contracts with national suppliers, which includes warranty. So all the components that go in the home into the renovation are the same. We use 3D mapping technology, so we can basically tell within a second the configuration of the home, the linear feet. So a tech can literally go into that home and just start punching buttons. I need new cabinets, I need this amount of paint, flooring, I need a new air conditioner, and automatically that scope, that budget is prepared.
Yeah.
And the central office knows about it immediately.
So I want to move on, because we're really fast running out of time, to the build-to-rent strategy that Tricon also. So interestingly, the company is not only acquiring these single-family homes, but also building them in a joint venture with the Arizona State Teachers Retirement System. Could you just briefly comment on what's special about that particular vertical?
Yeah, sure. So this is another new idea. We've been buying organic single-family homes, so one here, one there in a neighborhood, primarily in a community where it's an ownership community. It's actually one of the things we look at in our buy box. What percentage of people own in this community or in this zip code? The idea now is to create single-family rental communities. So imagine a subdivision in Toronto. Instead of selling that to the consumer, we build that subdivision and we rent it. And the idea behind it is you get the best of both worlds. You get the privacy of single-family housing, but then you get the community aspect of living, of being in a kind of more of a multi-family style community where there could be amenities. We can use apps to plan block parties or barbecues. So we think it's this kind of interesting hybrid asset class. If you go back to the 50s and 60s, we don't have a lot of this here in Canada, but garden-style complexes were built everywhere in the U.S. sunbelt in the 50s and 60s, surrounding a pool. And that's where the boomers lived. And now the millennials, which again are shut out of the home ownership market, but are now at the point where they have kids, we think a lot of them might like to live in these single-family rental communities. So Arizona State's really excited about this. We have a big venture with them. We're just starting, but it could become a very big business.
So speaking of Arizona State, Tricon is engaged in a lot of third-party capital management. So can you explain, like, what is your pitch? Like, why is Tricon so popular with these global institutional investors?
Well, I mean, I think, well, let's first talk about the product. And this is pretty easy, actually. We tell them we're focused on essential shelter, which is what we're doing. And the thing with essential shelter is that if you're in an inflationary time, good economic times, and there's wage inflation, you're able to obviously increase rents and you get good torque in the business in good times like we are today. But in tougher times, it's just, people need a place to live. Where are they going to go? I mean, our residents that are renting our single-family homes, again, they're paying $1,400 a month. They're not going to double up. They're going to find a way to make that work. So we think it's a very defensive asset class, will perform well in good times and bad times, and that's exactly what the big sovereign wealth funds and pension plans are looking for. They're looking for long-term assets that they can match against the long-term liabilities. So we have the perfect product for them. So that part, I think, is fortunately today fairly easy. The question then is why Tricon? And I think, look, we've been in business for 31 years. We've got a lot of experience. We've got the track record. They like our focus. So some of them are obviously used to, backing the really big PE shops, but we're singularly focused on residential, and they like that. We're a sharpshooter.
Yeah, I think it's a big change in the market today. That if you're an owner operator, you can add value. That the whole real estate market is no longer just financially driven. It's not a buy sell financial flip.
Right.
Flip the asset kind of market anymore. And so the company really adds value, and the investors respond to that.
And I think the other thing is, I mean, we're now a fully integrated, operator, property manager, developer. They've moved away as returns have compressed, and it's harder and harder to make a return. You got to offer more. I mean, David always used to say to me, what good are you to man or beast? And that's exactly the point. How are we going to be relevant to these institutional investors? Being an allocator, you're not relevant anymore.
Yeah.
So the fact that we can offer all of that under one roof and do it, I think, with great reporting and with integrity, I think we offer a lot. Evelyn will tell me if I missed anything after.
So Gary likes to say that the company is purpose-driven. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, so purpose-driven answers the why, not the what. The what is we're a rental housing company, or maybe we want to be the most innovative rental housing company, but why? And the why is because we want to enrich, our team, our employees, the lives of our team and our employees and our residents and the communities we all live in. That's why we want to do it. It's not a tangible goal. It's aspirational. It's something we may never fully achieve. It's something that might take 20 or 50 or 100 years. But that's what brings everybody at Tricon together. And the reason that's so important is that we find that when people feel that they work for a purpose-driven company, there's more meaning to what they do. They have more conviction in their job. They're going to be more productive. And so what we're really trying to do is we take care of our people, our team first, well-being, wellness, help them with career progression, education, so that then they feel fulfilled and they can take care of our residents. I mean, you would never want to have disgruntled employees take care of residents. Think about how that's going to go. And so it sounds like common sense, but that's essentially what we're trying to do. So there's a method to our madness. But when our maintenance techs feel pride in what they're doing, then they're really going to take care of our residents. And then our residents' retention is going to go up. They're going to be more likely to referral. So that's what purpose-driven means to us, and it's a lifelong, it's an evolution.
Even in your headquarters building, you have you promote the well-being of your employees with stand-up desks and excellent lighting and shades that go down when the sun is at a certain angle and no carpets on the floors and all these really thoughtful elements. People eat in a common area as opposed to at their desks. All these really thoughtful efforts create a culture to the whole company, I guess, at Tricon.
Yeah, and I think all of those things have been transformative for our team. And I think the biggest one is this idea that you're not allowed to eat at your desk, right? So I think when we first implemented that idea, people thought that was crazy. But the idea is if you're too busy, you can't take a 15-minute break, you're too busy. Yeah. And also, you're missing a great opportunity to socialize and to meet others at the company and to exchange ideas. And just to take a break, actually. So we've done that with huge success. The other one, key, we only have 2 rules. That's one of them. The other one, we kind of fight every day, is this idea that in a meeting of less than 60 or 90 minutes, you can't bring in your phone, right? So we fight that because we want people to be in the moment. We want them to be mindful, right? And so these are kind of some of the things we're really trying to affect the culture. I really believe you get the culture you deserve, and you got to fight that every day. And if you don't take care of your culture, you'll have problems down the road. Yeah. So we're always trying to improve our culture.
So coming home here to Toronto, the Tricon currently has 3,600 rental units in various stages of development, pre-development and development in Toronto, ranging from affordable to higher-end rental units across the city, 7 projects. And the Selby is currently complete and operating. That's the first project. As the founder of the PUG Awards, which maybe, I'm not sure everybody knows what those are, could explain what they are. How do you think Tricon's projects are going to stack up?
Well, I would tell you for sure they'd win, right? But that's easy to say because the PUG Awards isn't around anymore. Look, the PUG Awards, for those that don't know, was the People's Choice Awards for architecture. And so, I mean, that was the great thing. The really interesting thing about the People's Choice Awards is that you could take experts and say, Mike or whoever, let's take a look at these buildings. What is your opinion? How would you rate these buildings? It turned out that when you aggregated individual decisions, you would get the same or a better result. That was kind of the brilliance behind the People's Choice Awards. So the other thing we learned from that is that everyone likes anything that is more human scale. So a lot of the buildings are towers, so that it just is what it is. But the reason the Selby would have, I think, done extremely well is because the front of the building, the entrance, is the heritage building. It's the Gooderham Mansion, right? That's been beautifully restored. That gives that kind of the human scale to it. The building is clad in red masonry, right, as opposed to another glass building. So, and it's got a really dramatic notch. I think all of those things make the building stand out on the skyline, and the Selby's received all kinds of awards, and actually made a ton of money. A lot of buildings that receive a lot of awards don't make any money. That's a joke. I remember one year when I presented it to one developer, he said, "You know what they say about buildings that get awards, right?" But the great thing is that if we can find a way where we can make a lot of money and improve the quality of architecture in the city, that's what we want to do.
The PUG Awards were for best and worst.
Best and worst. That was the other thing that was very un-Canadian. And actually over time, we became more politically correct with it, and some of the board members were upset. But essentially, we published a list from first to last of how the buildings were ranked. And that was the part that was unconventional. And, it's hard to, we were talking today about, what we eat. If I said to you, you should be a vegetarian, like that doesn't go across very well if I tell you what you're going to eat. And if I went to a developer and said, your building's ugly, that doesn't go over very well.
Right.
Right? So if you could have the people vote on it and then you list it, I don't need to say that anymore.
Right.
But that's essentially what we were trying to do, Anna and I were trying to do, and take ourselves out of it. And it worked really well. And in fact, even, and this was, we're going back, 5 to 15 years, but even in that time period, the Pug Awards were front section news for all the major papers for the better part of 5 to 10 years, because the media loved looking at the ugliest buildings, and some of them were pretty ugly. So, but I think we did well, because I think we turned the conversation. So the idea was we goaded developers into improving what they're doing. And my hope one day, and I think we're getting there. This is certainly the culture that Chicago has. There should be a culture in Toronto where we try to outdo each other. That's really what we want. Each developer should try to be doing something better than the next in terms of design and architecture. If we want our city to truly be great from an architecture perspective, that's what we need to do. We don't need the city to do it. We now have a design review panel, but the development community can do that by themselves the way Chicago has. And so I hope that we'll continue to try to outdo each other.
I've always had a sense that Toronto is pretty self-conscious when it comes to architecture, but no?
I think we are now, but I don't think we
Yeah.
were 10 or 20 years ago.
Okay.
I mean, we definitely were at one point in time. We were back in let's say the 50s, to 70s. But I would say in the last few decades, we've not been as progressive as we could be.
Okay, so unlike your business in the US, which generates almost immediate cash flow because you're acquiring properties and then just doing some relatively minor fix-up and renting them out, cash flow from the development of high-rise rental buildings in Toronto won't be realized for several years. Are these businesses synergistic? I mean, one could argue two different countries, two different types of, one's a development activity, one's an acquisition. Or not?
Yeah, I mean, of course we think that. I mean, I think we just view it as a continuum, right? I mean, in any given business where it's single family, I mean, for example, single family rental, people view it with one lens today. But why can't there be multiple strategies within single family rental? There could be core plus, value add, opportunistic, built to core, which is what we're doing with Arizona State. Multifamily's always had that vernacular, right? So in Toronto, what we're doing is we're doing built to core within multifamily, because there aren't any Class A buildings to buy. It doesn't exist. The way this city's evolved recently is that new apartment product is really provided by way of condos. Investors are buying the units and then they're renting it out. We think a more efficient model is actually to build rental property and rent it directly to the consumer household.
But
with
it's actually
professional
very
management.
difficult to find sites that are affordable to do that. So
It
can you
is.
describe the acquisition
Yeah,
strategy?
no, it's very tough. It's a challenge, and especially because in many cases we can't always compete head to head with a condo developer that might be able to pay more up front. Typically in the apartment business, you're going to make that money over a longer period of time. Condo, you're able to make the money quicker.
Right.
So we're really taking a long-term view on apartment. So we have to be more creative. We have to partner with landowners that maybe don't have development expertise, but rather than sell their site to a condo developer and maximize short-term gains, they're more willing to develop it as an apartment for generational long-term cash flow purposes. There's definitely tax advantages to doing that as well. So we need to work with those type of groups or government agencies. We've got a really, I think, world-class project that we're doing with Dream and Kilmer in what's called the West Don Lands on the east side of the city by the Distillery District. That is an opportunity where we're partnering with three levels of government, federal, provincial, and city, to create what I think will be, when it's done, a leading example of city building, not just in Toronto, but around the world. So we just have to be more creative, but this is what we need, and I think the government at different levels realizes that, and so I think we're going to see more and more opportunities to develop rental and affordable rental in partnership with the government.
So it's two different executions of the same strategy.
Well, the other thing I would say about it is that the property management is consistent, right? So we've internalized property management north of the border here in Toronto. That's being run out of Santa Ana, Orange County, where we have our accounting, IT, legal, our call center, our procurement. Everything's being run centrally. And a lot of the technologies that I talked about, I didn't get all the way, but all the technologies that we've used to innovate the single-family rental business, we believe we're going to be able to apply to multifamily. I'll give you an example. I talked about the automation of home acquisitions, but we've also automated the acquisition of the customer in single-family rental. So the way that works is if you're interested in renting one of our homes in the sunbelt, we would use search engine optimization. You'd be driven from an internet listing site to our website. Let's say you were interested in 123 Elm Street. You could take a virtual tour of that home, and then you can go and see it through what we call a self-showing. This is the game changer. In the early days, we were sending leasing agents to meet people, and that was very inefficient because the leasing agent might get stuck in traffic or someone didn't show up. Very expensive way. So we in the industry developed self-showings. The way that works is you'll call our call center, we'll take a nominal deposit, we'll take your credit card and your driver's license, and when you show up to the property, and you can go whenever you want. You can go at 5 in the morning, you can go at midnight, you take a selfie of yourself, that gets matched through facial recognition with your driver's license, and the door automatically opens, you're in. So that's how far we've advanced this. And then a few minutes later, we'll send you a text, and we'll say, if you like the home, here's how you apply. You can apply online, we qualify you virtually, you sign online through DocuSign, and you pay online. You're not going to super and bringing your post-dated checks. That's how this has evolved.
Yeah.
So I said that last part to compare that to multifamily, but I think once buildings are stabilized, our buildings are stabilized, for example, the Selby, we should be experimenting with self-showings. And it turns out that millennials really don't like touring with agents. They would much rather do the research online and just do this on their own. And then what we can do is we can repurpose that payroll. So now the people that are on property, maybe they can be involved in resident engagement, planning activities for the residents.
So are you using smart locks to program access?
Yeah, and at the Selby we have smart locks. So that's essentially where it's going. And then also the Triforce, the operating software, enterprise software we use for renovations and turns in single family is definitely something that can automate workflows in multifamily here in Toronto. So we're going to keep on getting more and more efficient with what we do. There's a lot of synergies, and we're just in the early days of achieving them.
So I'm going to call this leadership in the age of disruption. It's kind of what you're doing, which is where we are. Clearly, you have a great track record behind you, 18 years at Tricon. How do you see the future of Tricon? What do you see? Where do you see the company going?
Well, I think we've defined who we are, and what we're going to be. Right, we're a rental housing company, and we'll continue to manage third-party capital. So I think none of that's changed. It's actually, I asked this question to some of our executives at our Investor Day. We currently own and manage about 30,000 rental units, and I said, if we come back in 10 years, how many units do you think we'll be at? And interestingly, they all did their math differently, but they all came to 100,000 plus. So I think in a decade, and that's not aggressive, I think we'll be, if all goes according to Hoyle, you never know. I think we'll be at 100,000 units. And it's a scale business, so every home, every apartment that we add makes us more and more efficient. But I think what's incredible about our model is if you think about disruption, if you think about venture capital, typically what happens is you have ideas and capital on one hand, and then you have people and technology on the other. And it's not a very efficient process. You read about the eBays and the Ubers that ultimately succeed, but there's thousands of companies that just go by the wayside. We've got capital ideas, people, and technology under one roof. So we have, I think, this tremendous advantage at Tricon to be able to continue to innovate. Right? Every time we have a problem, we embrace problems. Every time there's a problem, that I think is what the age of disruption means. You have to be open-minded. You have to be willing to embrace problems and relish at the idea of coming up with new solutions. Right? So that's I think, and I don't know where it ends up. Like I never thought I'd be sitting here talking to you. And quite frankly, I don't even set goals of 100,000 units. It's not really interesting. I try to challenge our team to have stretch goals for the given year. You know, if we're going to acquire 3,000 units, maybe we should try to get to 4,000 or 5,000. But it's not thinking that far out. It's more, it's a process of continuous improvement. Put your head down, work hard, continue to improve, and you see what happens.
And maintaining that flexibility, I think, has been critical to the company over its whole history. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you have to, you know, you can't be too set in your ways in an age of disruption, right?
Yeah.
Because you can get left behind really quickly.
Right.
And I would say anyone now, you know, in the audience, if you're not applying technology to your business today, you know, look out, right? Things are changing really fast. I mean, think about it this way. You know, we've had smartphones for what, 10 years maybe? And we've been on this planet for 50 to 60,000 years. So think about how things have changed in the last decade. It's unbelievable. We're living in an incredible time right now. This is a really interesting time. This, I think it harks back to the 20s, right? When we, you know, ushered in a new era of mass production of automobiles, and there was mobility and connectivity. Well, now the smartphones put that on steroids, right? So we're just starting. It's just going to keep on going. I think we'll be at this for a couple of decades.
Yeah, I feel like disruption is being disrupted, and then disrupted again.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you.
So I think we're going to take questions now. If anybody has any questions for Gary.
Hi, Michael Fox from Mod Developments. I'm wondering if you're encountering interesting policy issues as you're doing single-family rental in the sunbelt, and if that has any implications for the whole discussion about the yellow belt in Toronto and missing middle.
Well, what we're doing in the sunbelt is really helping to provide the solution for the fact that there's, you know, relatively there's affordability crisis, and there's just not enough, you know, affordable housing being provided. Essentially what we're doing is and actually a lot of these technologies are doing it, is we're taking capacity out of the economy and we're repurposing it. That's essentially what Airbnb does. We're doing that with single family homes. So we are providing, and when you think about it, the value proposition is unbelievable, right? We take what could be an older home, we renovate it to a common standard. It's not a state-of-the-art home. I mean, we've built state-of-the-art homes. We know what those look like, but it's a hotel-ready home. I mean, and that does not exist. If you ever try to rent a home, I mean, the walls are scuffed. It's going to probably be a bad experience. This is a hotel-ready home, and then we provide you with professional property management. So that, you don't have to go to Home Depot on the weekend, for example. We take care of the home for you. It's a maintenance-free lifestyle. So it's an incredibly compelling value proposition, which I think a lot of people recognize is needed. Now, that being said, when we talk about kind of policy and kind of housing advocacy, the pressure in the U.S. has really come from the much more expensive locales, it's similar to Toronto, places like California or New York, where there is more pressure of rent control. But in the Sunbelt, and America, as you know, is a very divided place. And we're seeing this play out right now in the run-up to the 2020 election, but there's very different views as how to govern things like housing or think about capitalism. And in the Sunbelt, rent control for the most part is an anathema. It just, nobody would want that. They believe in the market. They believe in capitalism. They believe capitalism will fix things if they're not working. I'm not judging or commenting whether it's right or wrong. That's really the belief. So we don't really encounter that in the Sunbelt, but there has recently been a push in California to adopt a cap on rent increases, which I believe has been adopted, and we think it makes sense. It's a reasonable cap. The approach we take as a landlord is to try to be responsible, right? So the interesting thing that we do is we self-govern on renewals. There's no cap in our business in the U.S. We could raise rents to whatever we want, but we don't. We try to be responsible. We self-govern on renewals. We strike the balance between our residents and our shareholders. We believe that over time we'll get the rent, but we don't want to chase residents out of our home. We're trying to run a model where we have the lowest possible turnover. So that's the way we think about it. But this kind of missing band is really what we're providing. That's our business in many ways is set up to solve that.
You're finding tenants are staying multiple years for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at our turnover ratio, and again, remember the market in Toronto turnover is much lower because, for example, in apartments we rent control here, but our single-family rental business, the turnover has been at or below 30%. In fact, it's about 27% for the year. So that means that residents are staying in our homes for 3 to 4 years on average. So we're pretty happy with that.
Gary, excellent presentation.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask you, how are you using leverage as part of your acquisition and ownership model?
So we use property level debt or recourse debt, and our leverage at this point is, I would say, relatively high. Our leverage is at 60% on a look-through basis. That's not high from a private equity perspective, as a lot of private equity companies are very comfortable operating at 60 to 65% leverage, but as a public company, the trend has been to lower leverage. And so we've talked about publicly how we have a path to lowering our leverage from 60% to 50 to 55, which is where we think it should be. But our model is to take on leverage typically at the property level. And I think over time, that might evolve to taking more unsecured debt on. We'll see how that goes, but that's the way we think about it.
Hi, when you're looking at building purpose-built rental in Toronto, what sort of yields are you looking to achieve first year out, or once it's stabilized? So the going-in cap rate.
Yeah, so I mean, we're typically underwriting untrended development yields of about 4.5%. That's what we would underwrite, and that would compare to, where would those buildings trade today? Maybe 3.5, maybe 3 3/4. We're locking in long-term financing in the low 2s, 2 to 2.5. So we feel there's a good spread between that untrended yield, that means based on today's rates, and where buildings are trading and where the financing market is. But we're finding because of rent inflation, the yields tend to be considerably higher. So the Selby, for example, the development yield was about 6%.
Thanks for a great presentation so far. So 2 questions. One is your development program. I mean, you mentioned, I don't think you're a REIT, but you've got a dividend, so you've got to be careful on your free cash flow. But can you talk a bit about the development program and then, any sort of technology-driven improvements on the sort of development construction side, anything along those lines?
Well, I can tell you for sure we're not a REIT. We are a corp. We do pay a dividend at 7 cents a quarter. Our dividend yield is about 2.4%. Our payout ratio, we just started publishing FFO, but our payout ratio on an FFO basis has been kind of around 50%. And on an AFFO basis, we haven't released that yet. It'll obviously be higher, but we're definitely generating positive cash flow. So, we're very comfortable, and over time, we do believe in paying rent, so to speak, to shareholders. So as our cash flow and our FFO continue to grow, we'll over time think about increasing our dividends. On the sorry, your other question was on technology and development.
Yeah, can you talk about your development pipeline?
Yeah, sure.
What you're looking at there, and then maybe go into any technology-driven enablements of development.
Yeah, so I would say that. We have a development pipeline of 3,600 units. That includes the Selby, which is 500 units, which is an active lease-up, almost complete. We're going to have about 1,500 units under construction this year in Toronto. So it's a pretty active pipeline, and we're working with institutional partners over time to double that. So this will be the highest quality apartment portfolio, never mind in Toronto, but for sure in North America. You just can't replicate what we're doing. All downtown, really high quality sites, transit oriented. So we're incredibly excited about it. We've built out a really impressive, I think, development team. We do all the in-house development, but we do not act as the CM or the contractor. So we're working with a variety of different contractors right now. They're probably better than me to talk about kind of what technologies they're using. But I would say this, I mean, the construction industry in general is not advanced from a technology perspective. Really, very little's changed in 100 years. And that's a problem that needs to get solved at some point because there's not enough young people. If you look at actually a lot of the construction workers, they're older, and there's not young people coming into the business. Mike knows, he's trying to help with this, but millennials are not, in general, not coming into the construction industry. This is a problem in the US and Canada. In fact, in the US, one of the reasons there's an affordability problem is, the US is not building enough housing and affordable housing. We used to joke that Trump wanted to build a wall to keep the remaining Mexicans in, right? So, but that's where the construction industry's at. You actually need labor to build stuff. We're not using robotics. Some stuff's being done kind of on a prefab or panelized, but it's not very advanced. There's a couple of major sovereign wealth funds that are investing in automation, but we're still in the really early days of it, and we're watching it closely. It's something we're intrigued by because the future of construction ultimately is going to be in automation, but I don't think we're close.
Hi, my question is, are you looking at single-family rental at all in maybe Southern Ontario as opposed to just the GTA?
We'd love to, but I mean, the numbers just don't work. And that just speaks to the housing affordability issue here. I think if we wanted to, for our joint venture partners in the US, we're underwriting our single-family rental acquisitions to just under a 6% cap rate. And I think if we wanted to implement that strategy in Ontario, we'd be looking at 1% to 2%. In fact, we looked at it in Alberta, which obviously has gone through some hard times, and I think the cap rate there would be 2% to 3%. That's how tough the economics are here in Toronto and Canada. So we'd love to, I think, again, our purpose, why are we here, how do we help people, is to provide, affordable housing and more rental housing. It's very tough to do here. And we need more help. We actually need more help from the government to make it work.
Hi, Gary. Follow-up question on technology. I'm curious how you developed the software and the algorithms you were talking about earlier. Do you have in-house capabilities or do you outsource that? And depending on the answer to that question, why did you take the approach that you took?
Yeah, you can't buy it. It doesn't exist. We are creating a new asset class, a new industry from scratch, essentially. There's nothing you could buy off the shelf. So we created ourselves with our own in-house team. We've got data scientists, programmers or software engineers. Not a big team. We've got a very small team, but they're essentially taking existing software and customizing it. So this is where I kind of stop short of saying we're a technology company because, we're not Salesforce and we're not Appian, but we might take an Appian platform and customize it for what we need to do. That's what's available today. You don't need to be a technology company from that perspective. You can customize enterprise software or CRM. So that's essentially what we've done, and we've applied that to every part of the business. And it's just anyone can do it. It's just having the mindset. If you ever have a window into seeing how these venture capital firms work, again, they just hire tens, hundreds of programmers. A few guys sit around in a room, come up with some problems and solutions, and they throw programmers at it to try to fix it. That's all it is. It takes a long time, and that's essentially what we're doing. But we're doing it in a very specific context. So we know exactly what the problems are and what the solutions need to be. It's not open-ended. There's one more question, I think, over here.
Yeah,
she's been very patient, so
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you so much. Wenji Kao from Aoya International. My question is, since you're working with the pension funds, will they give you the pressure in terms of your investment timeline? As you mentioned, the average renter will live in the house for 3 to 4 years.
Well, we always, I mean, I think the lesson is in anything, partnerships, marriage, and I mean, when you're doing business with these pension plans or sovereign wealth funds, I mean, it's a marriage. I mean, you're signing up for, 8 years, 10 years plus. They might even have a perpetual feel to them. You have to make sure that you're aligned up front, philosophically aligned. You have the same view of what you want to achieve. So we predetermine all of that. We will never have a fight with them in the middle. Well, you said it was this and we thought it was something else. So they're in these, they have these vehicles have terms, and a lot of the investors that we're partnering with today want to hold the assets forever, whatever forever means. But they do want to hold them forever, and we have the same view. We want to hold these assets for the long term, so we're managing them that way.
So that concludes our evening's Fireside Chat. My name is Michelle Ackerman. My name is Michelle Ackerman, and I'm a consultant for the Kilmer Group and ULI Toronto's Vice Chair. So I want to take a moment to thank Gary and Camille for tonight's wonderful discussion. Thank you for providing an in-depth and informative look at Tricon and its approach to leadership in our industry. On behalf of Gary and Camille, ULI Toronto's made a donation to Grand Trees, an organization of which Tricon is a founding sponsor. Grand Trees is dedicated to enhancing Toronto's green spaces while helping to fight climate change, making our city more livable. Launched in October 2019 with support from Mayor John Tory and city councillors, Grand Trees is looking to raise $1 million for tree planting in the Toronto area. Finally, I want to end the night by thanking our lead event sponsor, the Carpenters Union, and all of our annual Platinum and Gold sponsors for their continued support. We hope you'll join us at the ULI Spring Meeting in May in Toronto. For more information about the conference and ULI Toronto events, you can find out more information on our website and at the door on your way out. Thank you and good night.